Welcome back, Irish fans, to Breaking Down Braves Boys podcast. Just finished the season preview a couple days ago, but now we're taking a look at the ACC more in general, and I brought my guy Dan, ACC content, on for more of a look at the league in general and how Notre Dame fits into it. I didn't think there'd be a better guy than a guy who covers the ACC pretty much exclusively on Twitter. So, Dan, welcome on, and thanks for coming on.
Yeah, appreciate it. We've obviously been focusing on football a lot, ACC football, which Notre Dame this year is not a part of, but excited to kind of transition over to basketball. And, you know, it's the best time of year when both sports are on at the same time. And there's a Saturday, and you've got a premier ACC basketball game and some ACC football and just everything going on. That's the best time. So, yeah, appreciate you having me on.
For sure. It's a great time, except when Notre Dame plays Purdue in basketball and then Clemson in football on the same day. Good thing we won't have that this year, though. Yeah, those days are rough. I don't think we have too many, but just to start, can you give us a bit of a landscape of the conference? Last year was down. Pretty much anybody could beat anybody, except for Notre Dame until they beat Florida State. Didn't seem like they could beat anybody above their kind of wheelhouse, which we'll talk about later, but this year it seems like it'll be a little different. So what do you think the conference's landscape is this year?
I don't think it will be tremendously better than last year, especially at the top, like that top 4 to 5 teams. But I think the depth and the bottom will certainly be better, the middle as well. So in terms of the top of the conference, a lot of people like Duke, and they're the most talented team for sure. But I just feel like we've fallen into that trap every year, and Duke finishes in that 2 to 4 range. We pick them based off talent. We pick them based off roster, and they just ultimately don't get it done to win the ACC regular season. So I've got Florida State and then Duke. After that, it's kind of there's a tier UNC, UVA. And then, honestly, I think there's that next tier, Syracuse, Virginia Tech. I think Notre Dame kind of falls actually into that next tier. So I had a bold predictions article, which is predictions that I'm not completely committed to, but I believe that they're going to happen much more than other people. I had Notre Dame going to the Sweet 16, so I think we'll talk about the Irish roster a little more, but I'm definitely high on them. But I think we won't see a lot of top 10 teams in this conference, but definitely the bottom will be better and win those kind of more of those easy out-of-conference games, won't drop those mid-major games as much.
Yeah, we saw that a lot last year, and then I guess teams started to kind of get going, but like Georgia Tech last year dropped a few, and then they ended up winning the conference, so that kind of tells you how the league shaped out last year. But it seems like there's a lot more talent, even though the top you think isn't going to be as good. There's still guys like Paulo Banchero and Matt Cleveland coming in, and it's going to be tough for Notre Dame to knock off those teams just like a normal year, I'm sure. But you kind of talked about the overall depth of the league. How many tournament teams do you think the league has? Or I guess you don't have to commit to a number, but is there a range you think of teams that could get in?
So there's Duke, UNC, Louisville, Florida State, UVA. Those are the 5 definitely is. Probably Virginia Tech, that's a 6. And then I'd say there's probably one more, maybe 2. So I'd say 6 to 8 range with Notre Dame. Obviously, Syracuse forever on the bubble.
Mm-hmm.
I think that'll be the same case. I'm not too high on NC State, Georgia Tech this year, but I think Miami could be a team that could jump up and surprise people. They have a really good transfer coming in Charlie Moore at running the point, which will allow the superstar Isaiah Wong to play off ball, and I think he might lead the conference in scoring this year, so that'll be huge. But I would say if I were to give you a number, a range, I'd say 6 to 8.
Yeah, let's hope with Miami that they play a little bit better defensively than they did in that scrimmage a couple of days ago. Gave up 96 to Nova Southern. Well, let's hope for Notre Dame's sake they do. But
yeah, I don't put too much stock into the scrimmages, but it's definitely not good to see a team that poorly defensively for sure against a team they should be handling pretty surely.
Definitely. So over the past few years, for good reason, a lot's been made of Notre Dame kind of getting all their wins and teams in their quote-unquote wheelhouse. And until Florida State, they hadn't really beat anybody above them. And a lot of times they dropped games against bad teams. Like 2019-20 dropped a home game against BC early in the year. And then the same year they dropped a game against Wake at home. Last year they dropped a game at BC. Just not teams they should be losing to, but it seemed like they did a decent job beating teams that were close to them. Which teams do you think in the league are kind of in their wheelhouse and teams that they can beat on a good night?
Honestly, there's not – considering they did beat Florida State last year, correct?
Yeah, but that was the first ranked win in forever, it felt like.
Yeah. So, obviously, there's that whole thing about Mike Bray not being able to beat teams that, he's much worse than, I'd say. But this Notre Dame team, they could beat, I think, any team in the conference on a given night. They're very good offensively, and defensively, obviously, that's been a problem. But I think they brought in you attest to this more, but they made changes in the coaching staff and the scheme a little bit. And also there's Paul Atkinson, who I think is a tremendous rim protector, the Yale transfer. You guys all know about him. So I think Notre Dame definitely – they have a super high ceiling this year. In terms of teams that are in that tier, like I said, they're probably like that third tier. So Syracuse, Virginia Tech, maybe Miami, maybe Wake Forest would be the teams in that tier. And then the teams I mentioned, like Louisville, Virginia Tech, they'd probably be slightly behind.
Mm-hmm. Seems like you're a little higher on UVA than others. Is that just because of Tony Bennett and that kind of thing, or do you like their roster more than a little bit more than others?
Yeah, so the metrics actually are very low on UVA. They have them as like an 8-9 seed. I think they'll probably be a top 5 seed. I believe I actually had them 4th in my power rankings in the conference, so not as high on them. But I think Jaden Gardner is a tremendous transfer from ECU, and I think they're ultimately going to turn into just that defensive team that's going to grind out wins. Last year, we kind of saw them go away from that a little bit, but this year I think it's going to be completely like 60-55 basketball, the Tony Bennett that we all know and love. And I think they have Tony Bennett has a lot of experience being able to win those games coaching-wise, so I have confidence in UVA. They're too consistent.
Yeah, exact opposite of a Mike Bray coach team, it feels like, in terms of those scores. But you mentioned Jaden Gardner, a guy Notre Dame was after a little bit. Fit wasn't there, but Notre Dame also has a couple preseason – well, they have one preseason All-ACC guy in Prentice Hub. Those teams I thought were a little interesting as a Notre Dame guy. I'm sure I'm a little biased, but I think there's probably 4 guys on this team who have All-ACC potential, maybe even a 5th with Trey Wirtz. And if Blake Wesley is a little bit better than we think, maybe he's a 3rd-team guy. But those teams I thought were a little interesting, and they didn't really do a 3rd team. But what do you think about those? And you think there's more than just Prentice Hub who has All-ACC potential from the outside looking in?
Yeah, I was not a fan of those All-ACC teams, to be completely honest. And as far as Notre Dame is concerned, I believe I had Atkinson actually 2nd team, and I think I had Leshevsky 3rd team, or maybe reverse, maybe the other way around. But I actually had Paolo from Duke, Paolo Banchero. I had him on my 2nd team because he hasn't played a game of basketball yet, and at the college level, and obviously he's super talented, but I don't think he's like Zion level. And there's so many returning players: Michael DeVoe, Buddy Boeheim, Keve Aluma, Isaiah Wong. Just so many returning players that were stars last year that are probably going to take a step up, that I think that they were kind of misrepresented on the actual All-ACC teams. But yeah, I do think Notre Dame, they do have a couple guys with potential. Prentice Hub is a guy that could definitely take a step up as far as efficiency is concerned. Davion Williamson from Wake, that's a guy I really want you guys to look at if you're listening to this. Very underrated point guard, and he might be the reason that Wake surprises people this year. So that's just what I'm thinking. I was not a fan of the All-ACC teams.
Definitely. I thought it was interesting, too, that Hub was the only guy they put on there. I feel like that seemed like a little bit of a casual take because I think Hub is essentially pretty close to his ceiling. But there's other guys in Notre Dame that could really take a step up. And Hub was only an All-ACC third-team guy last year at close to his ceiling. So
yeah, I definitely place Atkinson and Leshevsky above him as far as the Notre Dame hierarchy is concerned.
Mm-hmm. And I think Notre Dame fans, maybe it's just us in particular, but I think the Notre Dame fan base is a little bit higher on Cormac Ryan than the other the national media as well. So Notre Dame, I think, has a little bit more potential than what those teams showed. But I've heard a lot. Well, the Notre Dame fan base, again, has really been critical of Bray over the past few years. How bad do you think he is against AC, or stacking up against ACC coaches, or do you think he's a little bit higher than maybe the Notre Dame fan base has made him out to be?
I mean, I kind of just feel like he hasn't adapted as well to the modernized game as some of the other coaches, and he's obviously had a lot of success in the past. He's had Elite Eight teams. He's still recruited well. So I think if we're going to rank all the coaches in the conference, right, 1 through 15, I think Bray, he wouldn't be in that bottom tier, but he might be in that second to bottom tier, like a 9 to 12 range maybe. So I think Notre Dame, the basketball program in general, has to maybe take more steps to embrace maybe the analytical movement, and just some of the modernized concepts they just haven't been adapted as well to. And I do respect the fact who was Solomon, right? The new assistant coach. Yeah, that was definitely a tremendous hire, and I think he'll definitely help them out as far as the ball screen defense is concerned. So that's definitely a good step in the right direction.
Definitely. Interesting to hear about the analytical stuff. You don't really hear much about that, but if you hear Notre Dame fans talk, I don't think many think Bray's in the 9 to 12 range. I kind of agree with you there, but if you look on Notre Dame Twitter, which is maybe not a great place sometimes, you either think Bray's in the top or the bottom tier. So good to hear from kind of an outside source.
Yeah, I'm here to keep it even head on. So
definitely, that's why I brought you on here. But to end it out, get another even head thing. Where do you think Notre Dame kind of finishes in the league? We talked about it, but maybe go a little deeper into your reasoning there and the roster.
So I'd say right on that tournament bubble. I think, let's see, I had them in my preseason power rankings. I had Notre Dame 8th. No, 7th. I'm sorry. So teams I had above them would be, Duke, North Carolina, Florida State, no particular order, Louisville, Virginia Tech, and Syracuse. So they're right behind those teams. I think they could be that dangerous 10, 11 seed if they make the tournament. And I've talked about it already, about how they're potentially one of the best offensive attacks in the country. I think my favorite source, Bart Torvik, has them 5th, and I think Ken Pom probably has them pretty high too. So I'm not sure what Haslametrics has it, but I do believe Notre Dame is a team that they have a little bit more depth than usual too. I feel like last year that was an issue. So definitely I'd say 7th is a pretty accurate. I'm maybe a little higher than most, but I think people who look really into the ACC also believe Notre Dame could be a surprising team this year. And I think for Bray's sake, they kind of have to be.
Yeah, I had them 6th, so I guess I'm not that much of a homer compared to I don't think people think I'm too much of a homer, but I guess that proves it as well. Talking about the defense, I thought was really interesting too, because I think we talked about this on DM a little bit, but I feel like they could really take a step up in that aspect, getting guys like Blake Wesley, Tony Sanders could play, and then they got the 2 big physical guys down low. So, and Anthony Solomon, obviously, like you said. I think you've done a really good job explaining that in articles and stuff. So I'll probably put those in the description if people want to check them out. But I think Notre Dame has done a really good job addressing defense, especially Bray acknowledging that's an issue and everything. Would you feel kind of the same way?
Oh, definitely. And I have talked to I had Coach Ryan Humphrey, the assistant coach for Notre Dame, on my own podcast as well, and he was very straight about that. He's like, defense has been an issue. We need to address that, and I think the program has definitely taken strides to do so.
For sure. So that's all the questions I had for you. Do you have any closing thoughts on Notre Dame or the ACC in general before we hop off?
All I'm going to say is the ACC is by far the best conference to follow, just because yes, they've fallen off the last couple years in terms of the conference hierarchy, but just the most dynamic, the most different paces of play and styles and schemes. You don't really get it in other conferences, but there's just so much that the ACC has to offer between Tony Bennett's pack line defense, Boeheim's 2-3 zone. You have some 5-out concepts with Wake. Like, there's just so many. It's the best conference. That's all I have to say.
For sure. If you watch the Big Ten, you're not getting that kind of stuff. Or most other conferences, you're not getting anything near that. So definitely a good point there. And thanks for coming on, man. Definitely check out Dan on Twitter, ACC content, puts out some really nice stuff there for football and, of course, basketball. And then they have a podcast as well, which is also really good, especially during basketball season. Not a huge ACC football guy as a Notre Dame fan, but basketball season, I'll definitely lock in more. And I like to hear the stuff at the end. So thanks for coming on, man, and we'll try to have you on again soon.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you.